What if I told you that one of the Caribbean's most indebted nations is quietly orchestrating the greatest economic comeback story in the region's history? Jamaica, once teetering on the edge of complete economic collapse, with debt so massive it made Greece look financially stable, has been executing a masterful economic transformation that threatens to rewrite the Caribbean's wealth hierarchy forever. While everyone's been watching the oil-rich Trinidad and Tobago dominate Caribbean wealth rankings for decades, something extraordinary has been happening under the radar. Right now, at this very moment, the economic gap between these two nations is at its narrowest point in over 40 years. And the trajectory suggests something that would have been unthinkable just 2 decades ago. Jamaica might actually be positioning itself to become the Caribbean's new economic powerhouse. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button so we can reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Your support helps us bring you more amazing stories like this one. Here's what makes this story so fascinating. For the past 50 years, Trinidad and Tobago has been the undisputed economic champion of the English-speaking Caribbean. Their vast oil and natural gas reserves created a level of wealth that seemed untouchable. Citizens enjoyed living standards that rivaled developed nations. Government coffers overflowed with petrodollar revenues. The country's GDP per capita placed it among the world's top 50 wealthiest nations per person. It was the Caribbean's version of Norway or Qatar, a small nation blessed with natural resource wealth that transformed ordinary citizens into some of the region's most prosperous people. Meanwhile, Jamaica was drowning. By the early 2000s, the country faced what economists called a sovereign debt crisis of catastrophic proportions. Government debt had exploded to 140% of GDP. To put this in perspective, imagine if your annual salary was $50,000, but you owed $70,000 in credit card debt, student loans, and mortgages combined. That's essentially where Jamaica stood as a nation. International credit agencies were preparing to declare the country bankrupt. Foreign investors were fleeing. The Jamaican dollar was in free fall. Economic growth had stagnated for over a decade. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Instead of collapsing under the weight of this crushing debt burden, Jamaica did something remarkable. The government embarked on one of the most aggressive economic reform programs in Caribbean history. Working closely with the International Monetary Fund, they implemented what economists call structural adjustment policies. Government spending was slashed across the board. Public sector jobs were eliminated. Subsidies were removed. Tax collection was dramatically improved through modernized systems and stricter enforcement. These weren't popular decisions. Jamaican citizens endured years of economic hardship as their government essentially performed financial surgery on the entire economy. Public sector workers lost jobs. Social programs were cut. The cost of living rose as subsidies disappeared. For nearly a decade, ordinary Jamaicans sacrificed their immediate comfort for long-term economic stability. It was a painful but necessary transformation. The results speak for themselves. By 2024, Jamaica's debt-to-GDP ratio had plummeted from 140% to approximately 70%. While 70% is still considered high by international standards, it represents one of the most dramatic debt reductions achieved by any developing nation in recent history. More importantly, this debt reduction freed up government resources that could now be invested in growth-generating activities, rather than simply servicing existing obligations. But debt reduction was only the beginning of Jamaica's economic renaissance. The real genius of Jamaica's strategy lies in something Trinidad and Tobago never prioritized: economic diversification. While Trinidad built its entire prosperity on oil and gas exports, Jamaica deliberately spread its economic foundation across multiple sectors, creating what economists call a resilient, shock-resistant economy. Tourism became Jamaica's golden goose. The country now welcomes over 4 million visitors annually, generating more than $4 billion in revenue each year. But this isn't just about beautiful beaches and luxury resorts. Jamaica's tourism industry has evolved into a sophisticated ecosystem that employs hundreds of thousands of people across multiple skill levels. From hotel management and tour operations to local craft production and transportation services, tourism creates economic opportunities that ripple throughout the entire society. Then there's Jamaica's emergence as a global hub for business process outsourcing. Over 44,000 Jamaicans now work in customer service, technical support, and back-office operations for international companies. Major corporations like Xerox, IBM, and Concentrix have established significant operations in Jamaica, attracted by the country's English-speaking workforce, competitive labor costs, and improving telecommunications infrastructure. This sector alone generates over $1 billion annually and creates middle-class jobs that didn't exist 2 decades ago. Jamaica's bauxite and alumina mining industry, while smaller than in previous decades, continues to contribute significantly to export revenues. The country remains one of the world's largest bauxite producers, supplying raw materials for aluminum production to markets across North America and Europe. Recent investments in mining technology and sustainable extraction methods have improved both productivity and environmental outcomes. Agriculture, traditionally a cornerstone of Jamaica's economy, has been revitalized through new export markets and value-added processing. Jamaican coffee, Blue Mountain in particular, commands premium prices in international markets. The country has also expanded into specialty crops and organic farming, meeting growing global demand for sustainable agricultural products. Perhaps most intriguingly, Jamaica has positioned itself as a regional financial services center. The country's improved fiscal management and economic stability have attracted international banks and investment firms seeking a stable English-speaking jurisdiction with access to Caribbean and Latin American markets. This diversification strategy creates something economists call portfolio resilience. When oil prices collapse, as they periodically do, Trinidad's entire economy suffers. Government revenues plummet, unemployment rises, growth stagnates. The country becomes entirely dependent on factors beyond its control: global commodity prices, international demand, and geopolitical events that can disrupt energy markets. Jamaica's diversified economy operates differently. If tourism experiences a temporary downturn due to global events like pandemics or economic recessions, the business process outsourcing sector can maintain employment and foreign currency earnings. If mining faces challenges due to commodity price fluctuations, tourism and services can compensate. This economic spreading of risk creates stability that single-sector economies simply cannot achieve. The numbers tell a compelling story about this economic transformation. Today, Jamaica's total GDP stands at approximately $20 billion compared to Trinidad and Tobago's $28 billion. The gap has narrowed dramatically from previous decades when Trinidad's economy was nearly twice Jamaica's size. More importantly, Jamaica's growth trajectory appears more sustainable and less volatile than Trinidad's oil-dependent model. But raw GDP numbers only tell part of the story. When we examine GDP per capita, the wealth distribution picture becomes more complex and revealing. Trinidad and Tobago's GDP per capita is approximately $19,000 annually, while Jamaica's stands at around $7,000. This significant difference reflects both countries' different population sizes and economic structures. However, these averages mask important nuances about actual living standards and economic opportunity. Trinidad's high GDP per capita is heavily skewed by oil and gas revenues that don't necessarily translate into broad-based prosperity. Much of the country's wealth remains concentrated in the energy sector, and related industries, creating a dual economy where energy workers enjoy high incomes while other sectors lag behind. Jamaica's lower GDP per capita, conversely, represents a more broadly distributed economy where multiple sectors contribute to national wealth. The country's minimum wage of 16,000 Jamaican dollars for a 40-hour workweek, equivalent to approximately $100, reflects an economy where wages are growing alongside economic diversification. More importantly, Jamaica's improving economic fundamentals suggest that per capita income growth may accelerate as the diversification strategy matures. The employment picture reveals another crucial difference between these economies. Trinidad's energy sector, while highly profitable, is capital-intensive rather than labor-intensive. Oil and gas operations employ relatively few people directly, though they generate significant revenues. This creates a challenging dynamic where economic growth doesn't necessarily translate into job creation for ordinary citizens. Jamaica's diversified economy, particularly the service sectors, creates employment opportunities across skill levels and educational backgrounds. Tourism employs everyone from hotel managers with university degrees to tour guides and craft vendors with high school educations. Business process outsourcing creates middle-class jobs for young people with secondary education and basic technical training. This broad-based employment generation helps explain why Jamaica's economic growth feels more inclusive and sustainable than Trinidad's resource-dependent model. Infrastructure development tells another part of this economic transformation story. Jamaica has invested heavily in telecommunications, transportation, and energy infrastructure that supports its diversified economy. The country's airports have been modernized to handle increasing tourist traffic. Port facilities have been expanded to support both tourism and export industries. Telecommunications infrastructure has been upgraded to international standards, enabling the business process outsourcing sector to compete globally. Trinidad, while enjoying superior infrastructure due to decades of oil wealth, faces a different challenge. Much of the country's infrastructure was designed around the energy sector. As global energy markets evolve toward renewable sources and away from fossil fuels, Trinidad's specialized infrastructure may become less valuable over time. The demographic factor adds another layer of complexity to this economic comparison. Jamaica's population of approximately 2.8 million is exactly double Trinidad's 1.4 million. This population difference has profound implications for economic development and wealth distribution. For Jamaica, a larger population means a larger domestic market, more potential workers, and greater economic scale. However, it also means that economic growth must be distributed among more people to improve individual living standards. The country's challenge lies in creating enough high-value economic activity to lift living standards for nearly 3 million people. Trinidad's smaller population creates different dynamics. With fewer people sharing the national wealth, per capita incomes can rise more quickly when the economy grows. However, the smaller population also means a smaller domestic market, greater dependence on exports, and fewer people to drive economic activity across diverse sectors. Education and human capital development represent crucial factors in both countries' economic futures. Jamaica has made significant investments in education and workforce development, particularly in areas that support its diversified economy. Tourism and hospitality programs prepare workers for the service sector. Technical education programs train people for business process outsourcing jobs. University programs in business, engineering, and information technology create the skilled workforce needed for economic advancement. Trinidad's education system, while well-funded due to oil revenues, faces the challenge of preparing workers for an economy that may need to diversify away from energy dependence. The country's human capital is well-educated and skilled, but much of that skill base is concentrated in energy-related fields. The regional and global context adds another dimension to this economic story. The Caribbean region faces multiple challenges that affect both countries. Climate change impacts, vulnerability to natural disasters, limited access to international capital markets, and competition from larger economies for tourism and investment. Jamaica's diversified economy provides better resilience against these regional challenges. Multiple income sources mean that disruption to any single sector doesn't devastate the entire economy. The country's improved debt position gives it more flexibility to respond to emergencies and invest in climate adaptation measures. Trinidad's energy-dependent economy faces particular challenges in the global transition toward renewable energy sources. As countries worldwide commit to reducing carbon emissions and investing in clean energy alternatives, demand for fossil fuels may decline over the coming decades. This transition could fundamentally alter Trinidad's economic advantages and force the country to diversify its economy, much as Jamaica has already done. Currency stability represents another crucial factor in this economic comparison. Jamaica's improved fiscal position and diversified economy have contributed to greater exchange rate stability in recent years. A more stable currency reduces uncertainty for businesses, encourages investment, and helps maintain consumer purchasing power. Trinidad's currency, while historically more stable due to oil revenues, faces potential volatility as global energy markets evolve. Currency stability becomes more challenging when an economy depends heavily on volatile commodity exports. The investment climate in both countries reflects these underlying economic fundamentals. Jamaica's economic reforms and diversification have attracted increased foreign direct investment across multiple sectors. International hotel chains continue expanding their Caribbean presence in Jamaica. Global companies establish business process outsourcing operations. Mining companies invest in new extraction and processing technologies. Trinidad continues to attract investment in its energy sector, but the country recognizes the need to diversify its investment base. Government policies increasingly focus on developing non-energy sectors, though this diversification process is still in early stages compared to Jamaica's more mature multi-sector economy. Innovation and entrepreneurship represent emerging factors in both countries' economic development. Jamaica's diversified economy has created more opportunities for small and medium-sized enterprises across multiple sectors. Tourism-related businesses, agricultural processing, creative industries, and technology services provide entrepreneurial opportunities that didn't exist during the country's debt crisis years. Trinidad's energy-focused economy has generated significant wealth, but that wealth concentration may have limited entrepreneurial development in other sectors. However, the country's accumulated capital from oil and gas revenues could potentially be redirected towards supporting innovation and new business development as diversification becomes more urgent. Looking toward the future, several trends will likely influence the relative economic performance of these two Caribbean nations. Global energy transitions may reduce demand for Trinidad's oil and gas exports, potentially forcing more rapid economic diversification. Climate change impacts may affect both countries' tourism industries, though Jamaica's more diversified economy provides better resilience. Technological advancement could benefit both countries in different ways. Digital technologies may enable Trinidad to develop service sectors that don't depend on energy exports. For Jamaica, technology could help optimize existing sectors like tourism and business process outsourcing, while creating entirely new economic opportunities. Regional integration through organizations like CARICOM could help both countries access larger markets and achieve economies of scale that individual Caribbean nations cannot achieve alone. Jamaica's diversified economy positions it well to take advantage of regional integration opportunities across multiple sectors. The demographic transition both countries face as populations age and birth rates decline will require different economic strategies. Jamaica's larger, younger population provides a demographic dividend if the economy can create sufficient employment opportunities. Trinidad's smaller, more rapidly aging population may face labor shortages that require immigration or significant productivity improvements. So, is Jamaica secretly getting richer than Trinidad and Tobago? The answer is nuanced but ultimately compelling. While Trinidad still maintains higher per capita wealth due to decades of oil revenues, Jamaica has created a more sustainable, resilient, and potentially faster-growing economic foundation. Jamaica's economic transformation from near bankruptcy to diversified growth represents one of the most remarkable turnaround stories in recent Caribbean history. The country has fundamentally restructured its economy, reduced its vulnerability to external shocks, and created multiple pathways for future growth. Trinidad's challenge lies in managing the transition from oil-dependent wealth to a more diversified economy while maintaining the living standards that energy revenues have provided for decades. This transition is not impossible, but it requires the same kind of sustained commitment to economic transformation that Jamaica demonstrated during its debt crisis years. The economic gap between these two nations continues narrowing, and Jamaica's trajectory suggests this trend will continue. While it may take decades for Jamaica to match Trinidad's current per capita wealth levels, the foundation for sustained, broad-based prosperity appears stronger in Jamaica's diversified economy than in Trinidad's resource-dependent model. Ultimately, Jamaica's secret isn't really secret at all. It's the result of deliberate policy choices, painful economic reforms, strategic diversification, and sustained commitment to building a resilient economy that can thrive regardless of global commodity price fluctuations. The country has chosen long-term sustainability over short-term resource windfalls, and that choice appears to be paying dividends for millions of Jamaican citizens who now have access to economic opportunities that simply didn't exist during the crisis years of the early 2000s. This economic transformation story offers lessons for developing nations worldwide about the importance of fiscal responsibility, economic diversification, and building resilience against external shocks. Jamaica's journey from debt crisis to sustainable growth demonstrates that countries can fundamentally reshape their economic destinies through consistent policy implementation and citizen sacrifice for long-term gain. The Caribbean's economic landscape is shifting, and Jamaica's remarkable comeback story suggests that natural resource wealth, while advantageous, is not the only path to prosperity. Sometimes, the greatest economic strength comes from building an economy that doesn't depend on any single source of wealth, but instead creates value across multiple sectors, employs people at various skill levels, and maintains the flexibility to adapt to changing global conditions. As we watch this economic transformation continue unfolding, one thing becomes clear. Jamaica's rise represents more than just numbers on economic charts. It represents the power of strategic thinking, economic discipline, and the determination to build something sustainable rather than simply relying on temporary advantages. In the Caribbean's evolving economic story, Jamaica has quietly positioned itself not just as a survivor of crisis, but as a model for how nations can build lasting prosperity through diversification, resilience, and sustained commitment to economic transformation.